So with your consent, we are recording today's class. Now, as I was telling you, in the previous class, we were discussing Act 1 of Julius Caesar. And in that, finally, we met with all the conspirators and, we had understood their motives. And we had also kind of understood the character of Cassius. Okay, not only through his own revelations, but also through the eyes of one of his greatest adversaries, Julius Caesar himself. And we met Brutus, and we found that, like every tragic hero, he also has his flaws. And his main tragic flaw being that he was prone to being influenced, he was prone to being swayed, okay, by persuasive people such as Cassius. Okay, so I'm just going to note that down here. Okay, so he was capable of being swayed by people such as Cassius. Understand? And now, with just a few cleverly placed words, Cassius has managed to get Brutus onto his side, because he needs Brutus on his side so as to help the rebellion, so as to help the conspiracy get the validity in the eyes of the public. So that this doesn't seem like a murder, but more like a sacrifice for the higher cause, that is the Roman Republic. Understand? That is it. And we also noticed that, Brutus imagines that a person like Caesar has to be nipped in the bud, because, such is the tendency of power that it can corrupt. Okay, so this is more or less where we have stood. And now we move to the second act, where in the first scene, we see that, Brutus's mind is in a state of turmoil. Okay, he is not at all at ease, because ever since he spoke to Cassius, he has been pondering over what the conversation was about. Okay, and the scene opens with him talking, by talking to himself, and he can't find out what the time is. And he says, he calls out to his servant boy Lucius, and finds that, he envies Lucius his sleep. Okay, because Lucius's mind is not burdened by the kind of concerns that have now come to settle upon Brutus. Okay, so Lucius comes over and he says, "Did you call me?" And he says, light a candle in my study and then come get me." And then, Lucius goes, and what Brutus does again is he broods more and more. And this is a very important passage, line 10. "It must be done by his death. For my part, I know no personal cause to spurn at him, but for the general." So he says that there is no other way but to, kill Caesar once and for all. I have no grouse, I have no grudge, I have no enmity towards Caesar, no objection to Caesar, except for the one that is being generally said by everybody. And what is that? That if Caesar is handed dictatorial or autocratic powers, he will end up being an autocrat. Okay, and that would be harmful to the republican spirit of Rome. That is what he says. Okay, and he says that, he would be crowned. He would be crowned. How that might change his nature? There the question. So he's like, if Caesar is crowned, as we know, the previous day, Casca and Cassius were talking, and Casca happened to mention that he heard the senators speak that Julius Caesar would be allowed dominion over all the possessions of Rome except Italy. Okay, and this fires Cassius up to no end. He gets extremely angry. So this is what even Brutus is talking about, that once he is crowned, that will change his nature. It will corrupt him. And he then, uses the imagery of the serpent. See, in Elizabethan England, this whole idea of the serpent, the temptation, the original sin, Adam and Eve being tempted by the serpent, all of these were very, very potent and easily identifiable images. Okay, so he says, how that might change his nature. There the question. It is the bright day that brings forth the adder. Adder is a particularly poisonous kind of snake. So it says, when it is extremely sunny, that is when the snake comes out of its hole. And that craves very walking. So he says, you have to be very careful of these sunny days when the snake comes out of its hiding hole, and then you have to be very careful of how you are walking. Okay, so that is what that craves very walking means. It needs that you walk carefully, because the snake is going to be there. You shouldn't be stepping on it. Crown him that, and then I grant we put a sting in him. So right now Caesar is harmless, but if you crown him, that is when you give the snake its poisonous, its poison, sting, the sting. Okay. So we put a sting in him, that at his will he may do danger with. The abuse of greatness is when it disjoins remorse from power. And to speak truth of Caesar, I have not known when his affections swayed more than his reason, but it is common proof that lowliness is young ambition's ladder. Okay, now this is a very important imagery. I will talk about it till here. Okay, so he says that the adder comes out of its hiding hole when the sun shines brightly. So when there is good fortune upon you, that is when you will show your true nature. And that means others have to be careful around you. And he says, if you give him power, that is when you make him bring out his true nature. You put the sting in him. Okay, and he says, that is when when the snake has the sting is when he will do real damage. Okay, and he says that power is extremely corrupting when it separates. Disjoins is separates when it disjoins remorse or your conscience. I have known.
Your voice is broke for like the past 3 or 4 seconds.
Okay.
No, ma'am, your voice is still breaking. Can you hear me?
Is that the same for everybody else?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is this better?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, it is. Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
Fine. So what is the last clear thing you guys heard? Anyone? What was the last clear thing you guys heard? Did you hear about power and conscience?
It's when the good fortune comes.
Okay, fine. Okay. So, it's when, times are good for you. When good fortune smiles upon you is when you bring out your true nature. See, when you are at a disadvantage, you will always, try to put on your best face. But when you have nothing or nobody to be afraid of, that is when, you bring out your true nature. Okay. Think of that movie Avatar, the English one, where, there is that huge bird, right? I think they all have the pet animal, right, which flies. So this guy says that I am flying above the biggest bird because he is only used to looking down, because he is the biggest guy in the sky, so he will not look up, right? Yes, I think he's Todor something or the other. Anyway, so yeah. So this is exactly it. When you have good fortune, then you will not, be afraid of anybody. You will show or reveal your true nature. So that is why this man, Brutus, is afraid that once you crown Caesar, that is when he will reveal his true nature. That is what he means by the sting. Okay, Caesar will reveal his true nature. And then he also says that I have never known Caesar to have ever acted out of impulse or acted without thinking. I have always known him to act with his head, not with his heart. But it is common proof that lowliness, okay, that is humility, is young ambition's ladder. That is, in order to climb up the ladder of power, people generally pretend to be humble. So if you notice, actually there is nothing wrong with Caesar. Okay, it is all Brutus who is imagining that this could happen or that could happen, that Caesar could, come into power, and then he could, usurp all the powers, and he could become a dictator. Okay, because by his own admission, Brutus says, I have never known Caesar to, act with his heart. He has always taken very, very cold decisions, very, dispassionate decisions. So, but we know that humility is a young ambition's ladder. So he's like, maybe he's just acting humble. Now, you have to imagine in your mind how you would go up a ladder, right? When you go up the ladder, you are facing the ladder, right? Whereto the climber upwards turns his face, but when lie once attains the upmost round, he then unto the ladder turns his back, looks in the clouds, scorning the base degrees by which he did ascend. So Caesar may. So see, just as one climbs a ladder, they face the ladder, and then they look up as they are climbing. But once they have climbed up the last rung, what they do is that they turn their back to the ladder and walk forward, and then they look up at the skies, not at the ladder that they have left behind. So Brutus imagines that in his desire to climb to the highest levels of power, what Caesar might be doing is that he might be pretending to be humble so that these people will elevate him to power. But once he gets there, he will discard or disregard all of these people. Understand? And this is entirely in Brutus's head. Then lest he may prevent. And since the quarrel will bear no color for the thing he is, fashion it thus that what he is augmented would run to these and these extremities. So see, what he says is that he may then, kind of prevent other people. He might prevent competitors. Okay, and when he is thus, augmented or strengthened, he may show his true nature. Therefore, think of him as a serpent's egg, which hatched would as his kind grow mischievous and kill him in the shell. So Brutus is as much talking to himself when he says that this man might be like the serpent in the shell. Okay, once hatched, he could be extremely poisonous. So it's better to kill him in the shell itself. Okay, nip the problem in the bud. Now, Lucius says, I have lit the candle in your bedroom, in your study. Now, while I was looking for the match, the flint, the stone which would they strike, I found this paper. He finds a letter which has been sealed, and Lucius says, this is new. Last time I was in the room, it wasn't there. So Brutus says, okay, give it to me and go to sleep. And he says, isn't tomorrow the Ides of March? Remember that very significant date, the Ides of March. Okay. Then Lucius says, I do not know. And Brutus says, look in the calendar and bring me word. Now see, this whole idea of look in the calendar and bring me word, all of these are ways of informing the audience as to what date it is, so that they know the timeline. Yes. So Brutus says, these exaltations whizzing in the air, the meteor, the comet shower is still going on. So he says, let me read the letter. And in the letter, there are various exhortations that, are sent to Brutus, okay, which tell him, open your eyes, Brutus, okay, and look around you, okay. He says, speak, strike, redress, he is being told. And he says, to speak and strike, he's immediately, enthused. And he says, I promise you, if the redress will follow, thou receivest thy full petition at the hand of Brutus. So he says, if you have a complaint, that is, if you have a grievance, then Brutus will certainly address it. Okay. And then Lucius comes and says, March is wasted 15 days, which means that it's the Ides of March. And by then somebody's at the gate, and who it is, okay, he goes to see. And again, Brutus is having this soliloquy, this monologue with himself. Since Cassius first did wet me against Caesar, I have not slept. between the acting of a dreadful thing and the first motion. All the interim is like a phantasma or a hideous dream. The genius and the mortal instruments are then in council, and the state of man, like to a little kingdom, suffers then the nature of an insurrection. So see, his entire being is at rebellion, is in turmoil, is divided into two, one of which tells him that, he should not embark on this enterprise, but the other says that he should go forward. And note the first line. There too he points out that it is Cassius who alerted him. Whet is to sharp, W-H-E-T. Whet is to sharp. So he says it is Cassius who kind of, sharpened me in this case against Caesar. And ever since I have not found any peace of mind. And who is at the gate? It is Cassius. Okay. And he brings all the other conspirators with him. Okay. And now, that is when Brutus uses that word for the first time. He says, they are the faction. O conspiracy. Shamest thou to show thy dangerous brow by night when evils are most free? So he says, why are they hiding their faces? Are they ashamed of showing their faces? Okay. And, by then, Cassius comes and he says, okay, here is everybody here. Okay. And Brutus welcomes them all. Okay. And then, they decide to turn towards the east. There's a bit of let's say discussion on that, whether this is east or that is east or anything, but that doesn't matter. Okay. And Brutus asks for all their hands, and Cassius asks them to swear an oath, at which time again Brutus says, no, we don't need an oath. Look at the faces of the men in the republic. If that is not motivation enough, then no oath can help us. Okay. If you are not motivated enough by the state of the republic, then you should just go home and sleep, because there is no point of this resolution. Okay. And he says, again, see, he uses those words that Cassius has instilled in his mind, uses words like tyranny. Okay. And he says that, look at line 120. But if these bear fire enough to kindle cowards and to steal with valor the melting spirits of women, then, countrymen, why need we any spur but our own cause to pick us to redress? What other bond than secret Romans that have spoke the word and will not palter? So see, you notice that, apart from being easily swayed or easily influenced, Brutus is also an idealist. Okay. He is a hopeless idealist and a hopeless romantic. Okay. He is a man, who literally has his head in the clouds. And, he imagines that everything is as ideal as he imagines it to be. See, that is why when, everybody asks each other to swear an oath, Cassius says, let's swear an oath, is when, he says, the state of the republic, look at our faces. If this is not enough, encouragement, then I don't know what is. Yes. And, he uses, and what other oath? That is 125. What other oath than honesty to honesty engaged, that this shall be, or we will fall for it. Now, the sad part is that the company he keeps is not at all honest. And yet, this is a man who is looking for honor among thieves. Okay, he expects a man like Cassius to be honorable. And Cassius's entire cause itself is dishonorable. Understand? So here again, see, the dramatic irony that we were talking about earlier comes into play. Understand? Where the audience knows the true motives of Cassius, and they have to feel something like pity for Brutus. The catharsis that we were talking about in terms of Riders to the Sea and tragedy, yes, that catharsis will be experienced here in some small measure. Yes. Yes. And see, and the thing is that till Cassius spoke to Brutus, he hadn't noticed that the republic is in danger, that it is rather fraught, and the peace of the republic is in danger, kind of a thing. He didn't notice. Just 2 or 3 letters and the words of Cassius, that was enough to convince Brutus. This means that Brutus is not a cunning human being. He does not have the snake's cunning in him. What is in him is romanticism and high idealism. That is his problem. Right. Now Cassius asks, what about Cicero? Should we include him too in our cause? And Casca says, let us include him. Cinna says no need. Metellus says no, but his age will look good in our cause, kind of a thing. But Brutus says no, don't include him, because he will never follow somebody else's cause. He likes to chart his own course. So see, Brutus has a good measure of people like Cicero, but not of himself or this man Cassius. Okay, then everybody decides to drop him, and Decius asks, is this the only person we will be killing? That is Caesar the only man we will be killing? And immediately, Cassius says, yes, that is true. We should probably get rid of Mark Antony also. We should probably kill Mark Antony also, because he is as dangerous as Caesar is. Okay, and he might be able to sway public opinion in Caesar's favor. Now you know that Cassius is an extremely good judge of character, and he is a very astute politician. Understand? So his estimation will not go wrong. But again, that is undermined, okay, by the high faulty idealism of Brutus. Okay, so that is undermined by the idealism of Brutus. Okay, Brutus says, our course will seem too bloody, Caius Cassius, to cut the head off and then hack the limbs. So Caesar is seen as the head, and Antony is seen as the limbs. Okay. It will seem like we are angry and envious of these people, because Antony is, after all, a limb of Caesar. And he says, let us be sacrificers, but not butchers, Caius. So see, this is an endeavor to quell or to, completely erase one man's ambition and instead fuel the ambitions of other people. Okay. But here, the poor, innocent man that Brutus is, he does not realize that. Okay. So he says, we should not be sacrifices. We should be sacrificers and not butchers. We all stand up against the spirit of Caesar, and in the spirit there is no. Yes, of Julius. Souls do not have blood. Okay. So we are killing the body. Okay, let's not hack at the limbs. Let us leave it alone. And, he says, yes, 172, let's kill him boldly, but not wrathfully, not angrily. Let us kill him to his face, but not kill him angrily. Let us carve him as a dish fit for the gods, not hew him as a carcass fit for hounds. So he says, let us treat him in death with honor. Okay, let us treat him with honor rather than treating him like an animal. Okay, let's not hunt him down. Let us sacrifice him. Okay. And let our hearts, as subtle masters do, stir up their servants to an act of rage, and after seem to chide them. This shall make our purpose necessary and not envious. Okay, so once we do that, we also have to express our remorse, and we have to tell the people also, okay, that we are remorseful of this entire thing. Okay, because that will make our purpose necessary, not envious. See, once you commit an act and you kind of give it the sort of higher purpose, I did it for the nation, I did it for the family, I did it for the poor people, I did it for the world. Okay, when you say these things, you imbue things with a higher purpose, and when you do that, you are much easily forgiven, you are understood. See, that is the difference. Which so appearing to the common eyes, we shall be called purgers, not murderers. So see, if you imbue your task with the higher purpose and express remorse at the inevitability of the act, we had no choice but to kill Caesar. If you do that kind of a thing, what will happen is that you will appear as purgers, cleansers. There will be something divine in your action. Otherwise, you're seen as murderers. And he says, as for Mark Antony, just leave him alone. He can't do anything. He's as ineffective as Caesar's arm when his head is cut off. Okay, so here what has happened is that Brutus has very, very casually underestimated Mark Antony. Not just, Mark Antony's loyalty to Caesar, but also Mark Antony's political acumen. Okay, Mark Antony's political acumen. He has underestimated this. Again, Cassius says, "Yet I fear him, for in the ingrafted love he bears to Caesar." And Brutus says, "Alas, good Cassius, 185 that is, do not think of him. If he loves Caesar, all he can do is that he can kill himself. Okay, he's not going to come and take revenge on us or anything like that. And that also he will not do. What? Kill himself? Yeah, again, we have a problem.
No, ma'am, can you please repeat where you just said political acumen? I didn't understand that.
Okay. See, the thing is that they all have this image of Antony as a man who is given to pleasure. They think of him as a man who is only interested in having a good time. Okay, he has this image of a reveler. Okay, and a man who is generally not serious about anything. You should think of Saif Ali Khan in that movie, the latest movie with Tabu. I forgot the name of the film. Jawani Jaane Man. Okay, he was imagined that way. But the thing is that here Brutus has underestimated the fact, his loyalty to Caesar or his love for Caesar. Whose love? Mark Antony's love for Caesar. And also the political acumen or the political sense that Antony has. Understand? Because under all of this, playboy kind of an image that he has established, there is a very sharp mind. Okay, and that sharp mind will come to the fore, will come to the surface in a very short while. Understand? And nobody but Cassius knows this. Understand? So that is why, where, there is already one tragedy happening, there is another great sense of catharsis that is going to reveal itself when Antony gives that immortal speech. Understand? Now, am I clear, Vani?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else? Do you have any doubts so far?
No, ma'am, it's clear.
All right, fine.
No, ma'am.
Okay. So where was that? Yeah. So he says, "For the ingrafted love he bears to Caesar." That's what Cassius says. And oh yeah, we finished all of that. Yeah. So he says the only thing that he's going to do is kill himself. But even that he will not do because he loves his life of pleasure and revelry and so on. And Trebonius but says there is no fear in him. Mark Antony is not afraid. Let him not die, for he will live and laugh about this afterwards. All of this is in a way, a rather amusing thing for the audience because they will be smirking in their minds, imagining, who is going to be laughing at the end of this play. Now, the clock strikes. That is again an anachronism. There were no striking clocks in the time of, Brutus and Caesar. Anyway, so Brutus says, "Peace, count the clocks."
Ma'am?
And Cassius, yeah?
Ma'am, can you please say once again the definition of anachronism?
Okay, anachronism is, let's say, an occurrence where, something or some phenomenon that was not there in a certain time frame, okay, is introduced in it. Understand? This would be, for example, where Brutus might be saying, "Let me just check my email." That will be an anachronism. Understand? Provided the play is set in Roman times. If this were a modern interpretation of Julius Caesar, where it is all about where Julius Caesar is the MD of an office and they're planning a takeover, a corporate takeover kind of a thing, then Brutus checking his email would not be an anachronism. Understand? So this kind of a thing where there were no clocks, but because clocks are there in our time and we can understand clocks, it is just put. Sometimes it could be an error. Sometimes it is just made for the convenience of the people. That is it. Okay, is that clear now?
Yes, ma'am, very clear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So, and the clock has struck 3. Remember that, this could be let's say a symbol of betrayal. Okay, because when the rooster crowed thrice, Peter denounced Jesus. Remember, so that way, when you see this, the clock has struck 3. In a way, Brutus has also denounced Julius Caesar. Okay, and Trebonius says now we have to go, but Cassius again continues, it is doubtful whether Caesar will come today or not, because he has become very, very superstitious, and he talks about omens and ogres and so on, and his soothsayers might prevent him from coming to the Capitol today. And Decius says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Okay, and here we get an idea of the character of Caesar. Okay, it's interesting. Decius says, never fear that. That is 202. If he be so resolved, I can oversway him, for he loves to hear that unicorns may be betrayed with trees, and bears with glasses, elephants with holes, lions with toils, and men with flatterers. But when I tell him he hates flatterers, he says he does, and then being most flattered, lets me work, for I can give his humor the true bent, and I will bring him to the capital. Okay, so he says, Decius says, don't worry about that. If he does not want to come, I will get him to change his mind. Because, I have this technique where I tell him, oh, Caesar, elephants can fall into holes, where they dig pits to trap elephants. Then, bears can be, trapped with lenses and glasses and so on. Unicorns may be asked, can be trapped into getting their horn stuck in the tree and then captured. Okay, lions can be, kind of snared. They can be snared using traps. But you and men, ordinary men can be flattered, and they can also be trapped. But you are beyond that. And Caesar is like, yes, I cannot be flattered. But in the process, he actually gets flattered, and that helps Decius attain whatever he wants to attain. Okay, so you see that, in addition to being egotistic, Caesar is also prone to being vulnerable to subtle flattery. Okay, he's vulnerable to subtle flattery, and such is his ego that he does not recognize when he himself is being flattered. Understand? So what you understand is that Caesar is as much a mortal, as much an ordinary man as any of these people. Okay, so he is not exactly the great heroic figure that he has been built up to. That is one thing is true. Now, Cassius says, we will all come to get him. Okay, Brutus says at 8 o'clock, is that the time? Then they say, yes, 8 o'clock, and, don't be late. And, Metellus says, we should also include this man called Caius Ligarius. Okay, because he also has a grudge against Caesar, because Caesar did not like him for speaking good things about Caesar's rival Pompey. Okay, and he says, why didn't we think of including him? So Brutus says, good, Metellus, get Ligarius also. That would be wonderful. In fact, send Ligarius to me, and I will talk to him, because Ligarius absolutely loves me. Now Brutus has become an active part of this rebellion. Understand? So, Cassius says, morning has come. And, oh yeah, by the way, that's a very interesting statement that Brutus makes. Line 220 about Ligarius, send him but hither, send him over, and I will fashion him. Okay, I will shape him, I will influence him. Now he is speaking the language of Cassius. Okay, so Cassius says, okay, now next day morning we have to convene. And Brutus says, all of you should look cheerful and merry. Don't look rather dark or brooding or angry or uncomfortable, because that could give away our cause. Understand? And he says, be good actors like our Roman actors do. And they go. So everybody says okay, and then they all leave, and he calls to his servant Lucius. But Lucius is fast asleep. And yet again, this man, Brutus, envies his servant that undiluted, unburdened sleep that he enjoys. Now, this is the first time that we see Brutus's wife on stage, Portia. Okay? And till now, do you have any doubts? Anything that needs clarification, explanation? Okay, that is not what was intended. Anybody else? Okay. Now, Brutus and Portia are having a conversation, and Portia is constantly worried about why is it that her husband has lost his sleep, has lost his appetite. Sometimes he gets up in the middle of dinner and starts pacing around, and wondering what and muttering to himself. He gets up from the side of her bed and walks around, and he is right now outside at 3 o'clock in the morning, kind of with his doublet open, and he's absorbing all of these, this cold and fog and mist, and she's wondering why he's doing this. And he says, please go inside, you will fall ill. And she says, that's exactly what I have to tell you. Okay. And she says, why is it that you cannot trust me? I am no ordinary woman. I may be a woman, but I am a woman whom Brutus married, which means that there has to be something special about me. And she says, I'm not, one of those people who cannot hold a secret. And she says, such is my endurance that I have injured myself in the thigh. And she shows him a cut. Okay. And she says, I've suffered this silently. And yet, why is it that you cannot trust me? See, in the times of the Elizabethans, as well as in the times of the Romans also, this silent suffering was supposed to be a very, very good thing. Okay, it was supposed to be a mark of heroism. See, this is why I keep telling you that the idea of the disease, the idea of injury, all of these things, anything to do with the body and its condition is of great significance as far as these times were concerned, the times of the Romans were concerned, because all of this was seen as directly influencing or affecting a person's ability to function. Okay, so if a man was strong and muscular, he could make a good ruler. If he was weak and slender, he may not be a good ruler. See, that kind of physical prowess was considered to be more of a judgment of the character of the human being. Yes. So now she kneels down to him and begs him, and he says, don't kneel like that, and don't beg me. I will tell you what the matter is. You are my true and honorable wife. But before he could tell her anything, again there is a knock at the door, and he says, go in, okay, and very soon I will tell you what the matter is. And who should come in but Caius Ligarius, right? The man whom this man was supposed to fashion or shape. Yes. So Caius Ligarius comes in, and he has a kerchief around his neck. Okay, and this man Brutus asks him, are you ill? And he says, well, give me something to do and I will no longer be ill. And Brutus says, sure, there is something of great purpose that I have in mind for you. Immediately he takes that kerchief and throws it out and joins the cause. Okay, without even knowing exactly what it was. So you see, again, I'm telling you, the honor of a certain deed can just, get rid of any kind of illness. All of this is a great pointer towards the way that, the body was perceived in these times. Okay, so that is why. So Ligarius says, set on your foot, and with a heart new fired, I will follow you to do what I know not what, but it sufficeth that Brutus leads me on. So see, such is the public opinion attached to Brutus's integrity, such is his credibility, that Caius Ligarius does not want to know the purpose. He is all set to follow Brutus. So Cassius was right in his estimation. That brings us to the end of Act 1, Scene 1. Then you have Act 2, Scene 2, which is very, very significant. We can go on, right? No problem, right?
No problem, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Oh.
You can carry on.
Either way, do you guys have any doubts?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so now we notice that with each time the conspiracy, the time of the conspiracy is getting closer, things are getting more and more urgent. Okay, and now the set of conspirators has become complete. Okay, now earlier we saw the conversation between Brutus and Portia, and in their relationship you realize that there is a lot of love, there is a lot of equality, there's a lot of concern, and Brutus considers his wife to be his equal, his partner. Understand? And he would like to share some of the most darkest and most intimate secrets with his wife. He does not consider, women to be beneath him. Remember, I told you, in this part of the world at that point of time, the women were not allowed to select their representatives. So were slaves. they were considered to be people of inferior intellect. But not Brutus. He did not see Portia that way. He saw in her a very sympathetic and intelligent partner. Now you have the conversation between Caesar and Calpurnia, and you can make the contrast yourself. Now again, Caesar is also commenting on the omens and the augurs that he can see around him. And he says, Calpurnia in her sleep cried out thrice, help ho, they murder Caesar. Who? Okay, so he says that. Now remember that the clock struck thrice, and here Calpurnia cried out thrice in her sleep, help ho, they murder Caesar. And she uses the term they. Understand? So this idea of a premonition of something going to go wrong, see, all of this builds up that dramatic tension in the minds of the audience. See, we all know, and in fact the audience also knew that this man is going to be murdered. So that that cathartic feeling starts to kind of build up, because there were so many ways he could have been stopped. Something very similar to this is Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Okay, where there's a man called Santiago who is stepping out of his home, and everybody in the town knows that he's going to be murdered. Okay, and one way or the other, they had tried to stop it, but the inevitable happens. Okay, now I'm not spoiling it for you, because the book itself is called Chronicle of a Death Foretold. Okay, it's a very thin book. When your exams are done, try reading it. It's very interesting. Anybody has read it?
No, ma'am.
I see. You must try.
Sure.
Anyway, okay. So he says thrice she called out. Okay. Now Caesar tells his servant to go and ask the priest to do a sacrifice and to examine the entrails. In Rome, it was very interesting. They would kill an animal and then examine its intestine and its heart and all its other vital organs, and based on that they would come up with the omens. They would come up with the future. They could predict that. That was believed that way. So Calpurnia says, what mean you, Caesar? Think you to walk forth? You shall not stir out of your house today. And immediately Caesar says, Caesar shall forth. Things that threatened me never looked but on my back. When they shall see the face of Caesar, they are vanished. Okay. So he says, of course I will go, because anything that has threatened me, I have left it behind. Okay, or if it comes face to face with me, it has vanished because I have conquered it. I have finished it off. And Calpurnia says, Caesar, I have never believed in all these omen kind of things, but right now I'm frightened. Okay, and there are a lot of things that have happened last night. Yes, exactly. He reminds you of Sergius from Arms and the Man, correct? All of you?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Didn't I
Yes,
teach
ma'am.
you
Yes,
that?
ma'am.
No, I didn't teach you that.
No, you didn't teach it. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sergius is
So,
like,
yeah, Sergius is exactly. In fact, there was a time when I used to teach this play, and I always took this tone: I will never retreat. Right? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, he is a lot like Sergius, and this man is also capable of giving you a headache. Anyway, now we will come back again. Yes. So she says, I have never you have never believed in omens and auguries and things like that. But right now I'm worried, because there have been terrible things that I have heard. Understand? Apart from the dream that I had, she says, I heard that a lioness gave birth in the streets, that the graves opened and sent out all their dead. And that, there have been huge battles being fought in the sky. Okay. And there is blood that is raining on the Capitol. Excuse me. There is blood that is raining on the Capitol, and there is noise, there is unrest and turmoil, and there are bad omens everywhere. The horses are neighing, dead men are crying, and ghosts are shrieking and walking about the streets. She says, all these things, are very unusual, and I fear them. And Caesar says, what can be avoided? He says, what can we do about it? We can't avoid any of these things. Whose end is purposed by the mighty gods. See? So he says, if the gods have seen an end, if something is inevitable, it will happen. Yet Caesar will go forth. Caesar will go out today. Because these predictions are to the world in general as to Caesar. He's saying, it's not only about me. Why do you imagine that all this has to do with me? It could be about everybody else. And then, Calpurnia says something interesting. She says, when beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. So she says, if it were to do with the general world, there would be no change, there would be nothing happening. But the heavens themselves will be interested in what happens to princes. And Caesar then says his immortal lines, very important lines. Cowards die many times before their death. The valiant never taste of death but once. Of all the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to be most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come. Okay, so he says the brave will die only once, but the cowards will die many times because of their fear. Their fear itself is like, killing them. Understand? So, and he says, I don't understand why people should fear death, because it is inevitable. It does not wait for anybody. It just comes. And then, the servant comes and he says, okay, servant, what is the omen? And servant says, they have said that you should not go out today because, when they went through the vital organs of the animal they sacrificed, they couldn't find a heart. Understand? Then Caesar says, the gods do this, to shame the coward. Now, gods will be like, if we do this, then we will see if Caesar will go out or not. Okay, and they want to see if I am a coward. So he says, the gods want to see if I will stay home out of fear. So I will not. I will go fully well, knowing that, there is some danger, I will still go out. And, he says, danger knows full well that Caesar is more dangerous than he. We are two lions littered in one day. So he says, danger knows that I am more dangerous than danger. Remember that wonderful line from, I think it's a Kannada movie, do not trouble, because then trouble will trouble you. Something. Anybody knows that line? You people don't watch all these wonderful Kannada movies? Okay. So yes. So he says that, danger, danger and I are two lions that were born on the same day, but danger knows that I am more dangerous than danger itself. I am the elder and more terrible, and Caesar shall go forth. So, his ego, his pride, his that kind of a vainglorious attitude comes to the fore. Yes. And Calpurnia says, my lord, your wisdom, your sense has been overtaken by your confidence. Please don't do that. Call it my fear. Let it be that, you are brave, but I am the one who is very afraid. So for my sake, please don't go out. We will tell Mark Antony to tell the Senate, and he will say that you are not well. And she kneels down in front of him. Okay. Remember that Portia had also knelt down in front of Brutus, and that distressed him, that really upset him. Then Caesar says, Mark Antony shall say, I am not well, and for your sake, I will stay at home. Okay. He does not tell her, why are you kneeling? Nothing like that. By then, instead of Mark Antony, it is Decius who comes in. Okay. And he says, Decius will tell them. And he tells them, Decius, you tell them that, I will not come to the Senate. Okay. And now Decius says, my lord, I have come to take you to the Senate. And Caesar says, you have come, take my greetings to the senators and tell them that I will not come today. I cannot is wrong. Cannot annalla parayunnathu. I will not come. Just tell them that and tell them I said so. Okay. And immediately, Decius understands. So he's like, please tell me why you will not come. Otherwise, they will laugh at me. I look funny. But just go and say, hello, Caesar will not come today. So Caesar says, the cause is in my will. I will not come. This is, I will not come because I don't want to come. Just tell them that. That's all that they deserve to know. And he says, but for your sake, because I like you so much, I love you so much, I'm going to tell you, my wife has been, having some terrible dreams, and she saw that, my statue was, spouting blood like a fountain, and, many Romans had come and they were bathing their hands, they were washing their hands in it. And she says that, considering the entire atmosphere and everything like that, she thinks that it is a very bad omen, and she wants me to stay at home today. And Decius says, oh, no. That is a, misinterpreted dream. This is a wonderful dream, actually speaking. Okay? Excuse me. Can I just yeah, this is a wonderful dream, because actually speaking, what she has seen is that all of Rome will be enjoying the prosperity that you bring in. Understand? Okay, so see, he says that is on line 87, signifies that from you great Rome shall suck reviving blood, and that great men shall press for tinctures, stains, relics, and cognizance. This by Calpurnia's dream is signified. That is, you will be able to heal us. You will bring new life into the republic. That we will prosper from your leadership. That is the dream. Caesar is like, I like the way that you have, interpreted it. And Decius says, I have. And he says, when you hear what I have to say, then you will understand why I'm saying it. Because the Senate has come to the conclusion that today they should give a mighty crown to Caesar. Okay. And if you tell them that you cannot come because your wife might be having some dream, then next time we'll be like, oh, let us break up the Senate, and then we will come back when Caesar's wife has better dreams. And they will, and if you don't come, they'll be like, is Caesar afraid? What is it? So he says, please forgive me, I love you so much, but what else can I say? And Caesar says, how foolish do your fears seem now, Calpurnia. I am ashamed I did yield to them. So he says, I am ashamed of myself that I listened to you. Give me my robe, I will go. And in the middle, who comes? Brutus, Ligarius, Metellus, Casca, Trebonius, Cinna, and Publius. If you notice, Cassius is missing, because I think that probably Cassius imagines that if he also came, it would look very, very suspicious, and because Caesar doesn't like him, he does not want to upset Caesar. Now, Publius says, oh, good morning, and Caesar says, look, Brutus has also come. Why have you also come? And Brutus says, Caesar, it is now 8 o'clock. This is an information that he wants to give the audience also. Okay. Then, Antony comes in, and Caesar looks at Antony and says, see, Antony, that revels long nights is not withstanding up. Good morrow, Antony. So he said, look, Antony, you're looking tired from all your, good times from last night. Good morning. And Antony says, so to most noble Caesar. So anyway, he decides to get in store. Okay, get going, and he starts to walk, and Trebonius also joins him, and Caesar says, good friends, that is line 126, good friends, go in and taste some wine with me, and we, like friends, we will go together. And Brutus says, that every like is not the same, O Caesar, the heart of Brutus urges to think upon. So he says, every like is not the same like. He says, let's go like friends. And Brutus says, in his mind, it's an aside. Understand? So again, an aside is different from a soliloquy. See, a soliloquy is when the character is alone on the stage and he reveals his mind to the audience. Okay. Now, by talking aloud. But in an aside, there is a group standing on stage, and an actor breaks away from it and converses with by himself, or sometimes directly to the audience, what is going on in his mind, and then comes back to the group. That is what is called an aside. Okay, so this is every what appears, every appearance is not the same, and my heart grieves, or it is sad to think about it. Okay, and that brings us to the end of Act 2, Scene 2. Okay, any doubts so far?
Ma'am, I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
When Calpurnia says that heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes, like by saying the word princes, does it signify that Calpurnia does know something about Caesar's ambition, or his egoistic behavior, or something like that?
Of course. I mean, she has been living with this ego for such a long time, right?
Yes.
So of course she knows about the nature of this man. So she tried to appeal to him to stay back by appealing to his sense of safety. But that was a big mistake, because there comes this man who talks about his ego, who stokes his ego, and that is what works with Caesar. Understand? Decius.
Yes.
Now, Act 2, Scene 3 is a very, very small act where you have Artemidorus, who is
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, you asked us to remind you about the interpretation of Calpurnia's dream. yesterday.
Yeah, that was this, where she has a premonition of what is going to happen, but at the same time, nobody else kind of believes her. Understand? Caesar does not believe her, and that leads to a great deal of problem. Understand? And this dream,
Okay.
and also the further interpretation has not come yet. For that, Caesar has to die. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
So the first level is that what's her name, Calpurnia imagined was true. Hmm? But on the other hand, that was misinterpreted by Decius for their own ends. Understand? And now, when he actually is murdered, the audience will be able to understand the cathartic, let's say, impact that the revelation of Calpurnia's dream actually makes. അങ്ങനെയാണ്. Hmm? Okay. So first, let's get the scene out of the way. Act 2, Scene 3. Artemidorus, who is a confidant of Brutus. Okay. Now he, writes a letter to Caesar trying to warn him about the conspiracy. So he says, "Be careful of Brutus. Be careful of Casca, Cassius, everybody." Okay. So he says, "May the mighty gods defend you." And he says, "I will stand here till Caesar passes by, and I will say that I have an appeal to make, and I will give this paper to him. He will read it, and probably he will live." Okay. He says he will live if the fates do not side with the conspirators, with the traitors. Okay. That is a very small and simple scene. Okay. Now, Act 2, Scene 4. This is the last scene here in this particular act. Okay. Now, in the time that, earlier when Brutus and Portia had met, apparently Brutus told her the entire situation and what they are going to do about it. Now, Portia is extremely uneasy because her husband has gone to Caesar's house to fetch him. From there, they are all going to the Senate. Okay. And she still does not know whether the deed has happened or not. So Portia tells this poor Lucius. Lucius knows nothing. Okay. Sorry. Lucius, she tells him, "Go to the Senate house and don't stand here, go." Then, the boy is just standing there. Say, "Why are you standing?" Lucius is like, "No, I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm supposed to go to the Senate and then come back." Okay. So she says, "I would have wanted you to be here and in the Senate if possible, but you can be only in one place at a time." So she says, "I have a man's mind but a woman's might." Okay. So she is kind of feeling betrayed by her own body, and says it is so difficult for women to keep secrets right now. I wish that there was a huge mountain between my tongue and my heart. That is how burdened I feel with this secret that Brutus has entrusted. Okay. So again, Lucy says, "So I should just go to the capital and come back." And Portia says, "Yes, look
Excuse me,
for."
ma'am.
Yeah.
So Brutus had already told Portia about the thing. It's going to happen.
Yes, that is what. Now, see, there was hardly any time. Remember, the clock struck 3. Then Ligarius came in. Then, he spoke to Ligarius. And after that, possibly he might have found about 10 or 15 minutes to speak to Portia before he left to Caesar's house.
Oh,
Okay.
okay,
These
ma'am.
are, kind of minute details that Shakespeare never really bothered much with. And not only that, he would not imagine that when somebody is watching this play, they would wonder, when did he say this? Where did he find the time? So we are thinking that, maybe
He might
he
have said.
over breakfast or something. Listen, Portia, the problem is, and he might have told her. Who knows? Okay. Ah.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So, Portia says, "Go look for our Lord Brutus and tell me if he's looking fine. You just come and report to me." Okay. And then she's like, "What is that noise? There is some noise." And he's like, "What noise?" She's like, "Listen carefully. There is a noise, like, there is a fight, or there is a kind of a riot or something. Can't you hear it?" And she's like, "It's coming from the Capitol." Okay. Can I just take a small break? 1 minute, please. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Let's continue. So what was I saying?
Portia.
The
No, ma'am.
voice.
Portia heard something.
Yeah, Portia hearing the
Yes.
voice.
So she's, kind of now so, nervous that, she is looking out for these noises. That is her state of mind. She's extremely nervous. She's in a state of great anxiety. Okay. And by then, that soothsayer from the first act, he walks by. And Portia says, "Come here, fellow. Where have you been?" Okay. And soothsayer says, "I was at my house." Then he's like, "Okay, what is the time now?" And he's like, "It's 9 o'clock, dear lady." Then Portia's like, "Has Caesar gone to the capital?" He's like, "Not yet, but I am going to go there and, stand to see him." Then Portia's like, "Do you have some complaint to tell Caesar? Is that why?" He's like, "That I have, lady. That is, I want to befriend Caesar." He's like, "Why? Do you think some harm is going to fall on him?" Because, she wants to now find out whether anybody else knows about this. Then Soothsayer is like, "No, I don't know anything about that. But anyway," so he says, "I can't stand here. I'll have to go and stand in some place open." Okay, now Portia says, "I shouldn't be standing out in the open. I should go in because, otherwise my state of anxiety, I might reveal something more than I must." Okay, and, she says, "May God help Brutus with his enterprise." And then she's like, "Oh no, Lucius might have heard me." And then immediately, to cover it up, she says, "Oh, Brutus, has a small appeal to make to Caesar that Caesar won't grant." And he's like, "Oh, she's like, this is all too much for me." And, she goes and tells Lucius to go and bring word of Brutus. Okay, so that is where this particular act comes to an end. So here, this act is very vital from the dramatic point of view, because not only does it reveal the inner workings of almost all the characters, it has also set the tone perfectly for the tragedy that is to unfold in the coming scene. Understand? And if you look at it from the Aristotelian point of view, it has all the elements. It has built up a certain level of seriousness. There has been a considerable amount of pity and fear that the audience has experienced, because initially he listened to Calpurnia and he said, "Okay, I will not go," and immediately everybody must have been like, "Oh, that is a great relief." But then what happens is that, Decius comes in and weaves his words, and immediately, Caesar is caught in that trap and he decides to go. And whom does he go with? He goes with all of the conspirators. Okay, and this is a scene that, brings about a great deal of dramatic irony and pity and fear, because, people will be moved by the plight of Caesar, who is going to be murdered by the very people that he offers wine to and calls friends. Understand? So that is why this conspiracy is also a betrayal. Understand? And this betrayal is not of, Caesar alone. It is also a betrayal of Brutus, who is perceived as a betrayer. Understand? Because see, we always, call these backstabbing people as Brutus. But in a way, Brutus himself has been betrayed by whom?
Cassius.
Cassius.
Yes. Exactly. Brutus himself has been betrayed by Cassius. Understand? So this is a chain of events. And then all of this culminates in the events of the following act. Okay. Now, do you have any doubts as far as this particular act is concerned? Any aspect you would like me to go over?
No, ma'am.
Okay, fine. All right. So then shall we call it a day now?
Ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So, you people discuss and message me at next day. When are we meeting next? Not tomorrow. That's Arms and the Man. For this particular thing, Julius Caesar, when shall we?
Tomorrow evening, ma'am, or day after tomorrow?
Day after tomorrow. Not day after tomorrow. I will get in touch with you guys.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay, then. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Nikita, send me the attendance, please.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, within an hour?
Yeah.
Within an
Yeah,
hour?
sure, sure. No problem.
Okay, ma'am.